Good afternoon. My name's Miller, and I'm an addict. And welcome to the Addiction Show. And I'm proud and honored and delighted to have my good friend of many years, Paul Orshan, Paul O, here with us in house in the studio. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
So we have a lot of material to cover, and when I share, I tell people I'm like a glass of orange juice. You have to drink the whole thing because you don't know exactly where the vitamins are. The show is going to be a little bit of that. So I want to start with the fact that I heard you were in town. You live in Costa Rica now.
I do.
Right. And I heard you were in town, and I called you up, and we hadn't spoken in a long time, maybe since last November at the gathering. And I said, Paul, I do the Addiction Show. Are you available? Will you come on it on Friday at 1? And you said, yes, sure. So that's where I want to start. The willingness to give back. The willingness to give back. And you've been doing this. You've been giving back how many years?
More than 38 years.
38 years. Clean of?
Celebrated 38 years clean in recovery in June.
Right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So between the two of us, we're like an old person.
One old person
One
together.
old person
Right.
to another. So let's start a little bit by qualifying. When did you're a Miami boy, second generation?
Second generation native, yes.
And when did you know you were an addict?
That's a hard question to answer.
That's why I asked it.
Listen, I certainly knew from the time I was young that I would get obsessed with certain things, and I didn't recognize it at the time, but I certainly knew it looking back. And I got to a point in my life, in my, I guess, mid-20s, I had graduated college, and I came back to Miami. I was working at a restaurant, high-end restaurant on Coral Gables, and I would go to work and make cash and then go spend it after work. I don't really discuss particular drugs anymore because I don't think it's important. I used them all that I knew about at the time. And I got to a point where I just couldn't stop. I just was using over and over again, and there was just no ability for me to control that on my own. And I had been to a drug treatment counselor at one point, and I stopped for a short period of time, but he taught me how to stop, but he didn't teach me how to stay stopped. And it really wasn't until I walked into, for me, a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and embraced 12-step recovery that my life really began to change.
And you went to treatment, though, first?
I did not.
You did not. You went right into the rooms.
Right. I walked into a meeting. I used, before the meeting, I had paraphernalia with me. I ground that paraphernalia into a sidewalk at the University of Miami. Interestingly, a year and a half later, I was back at UM in law school, but went to a meeting at UM on a Wednesday night in June 1984. And I've not yet in 38 years gotten curious enough to go try it again.
So what was it about that night, and that you were just sick and tired of being sick and tired? I mean, we're going to do some cliches, but I don't know how else to express it. Why was that? You know what? I had enough, and I can't do this anymore, and now I'm going to try this.
I think that for me, I knew I had a problem for a while. I lost a relationship, and things happened. I lost jobs. I was fired from this job at the restaurant. What had happened was the Miami Herald at the time ran a series of articles over a period of a week to help you determine if you had an issue with a particular drug. I read them, and they had a survey at the end of the week, and it said, how many of these questions do you answer yes to? And I said 5 out of 10. So I figured I wasn't too bad. They said, if you answered yes to 2, you likely have an issue. So I called up actually AA. I'd never heard of NA. And someone told me, I think you should go over here, call these people. So I called the NA hotline on a Monday. They directed me, I still never learned why, to a meeting on a Wednesday. So I figured that meant I could use on Monday and Tuesday. And I did up until I walked into this meeting. And I think what happened for me is I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Another cliche, I'd had enough. And really what I've long believed over the years happened for me is, in recovery is really about 12 steps. And the second step is really about the hope that we find in Narcotics Anonymous and in finding recovery. And for me, although hope is the known spiritual principle behind the second step, for me, it really was about the principle of maybe. I remember meeting a young woman at this meeting who had 2 weeks clean. And I go, oh my gosh, how do you do that? How do you not use for 2 weeks? And with 2 weeks clean, she looked me right in the eye and said, just keep coming back. And something resonated with me. I can't explain it. It was some power, something I felt. I can't really define it, but I just sort of felt from that moment I was home. I had found the right place. The last house on the last block for me, and it just took, and I just kept coming back.
I believe I've heard you share that insanity is being in a 12-step program and not working the 12 steps.
I share it every time I share it. I just shared it the other
Well,
night at
no
a
wonder
meeting.
I got it.
I'm very consistent.
And that meeting at the U, I went to that meeting. Sorry to see that meeting end. That was one of the oldest meetings, as I recall.
Well, it still meets. It's a different format over at the church on 72nd and 72nd. They still meet on Wednesday night at 7:30.
So I was going to say, that was a Wednesday meeting. I wasn't aware that they met at the U any other night.
No, that was it. It was a double meeting. There was a beginners meeting at 7:30
Right.
and then a step meeting at 8:30.
Just to know how it let you know how it's come kind of full circle. August, which will begin in a couple of days, because I already paid August rent, that's how I know, is Overdose Awareness Month. And we'll spend just a minute there. Tragically, we're losing more people now than we've ever before, despite our best efforts.
I'm aware of that.
So last year in this country, 208,000 just from fentanyl, from overdose, and another 80,000 on the alcohol side. So the statistics are terrible. However, the Sandler Center at the University of Miami, which is there to help mitigate the harm reduction, is the word they use. And we're going to talk about some differences between 12-step and some other approaches to recovery. And if it works for you, God bless you. I don't want you dead, whoever that is. So I put them in touch, a little pat in the back, I don't normally, but with Miami Recovery Project. And as a result, Rachel Askowitz and the Sandler Center will be hosting Overdose Awareness Day on August 31st at the University of Miami. So the university went for many years of, no, we don't have there's no problems here. The parents are paying too much money to tuition to have their kids have parents, to now a recognition that we don't want more people dying. We don't want more people in the hospital. So as a matter of fact, they've also, they're in the process of hiring. They may have already put this person in place, somebody from student affairs also to deal with drug and alcohol issues at the U.
It's great. It's important.
It is important. And today, a little bit of good news to counter that 208,000, the FIU has now Panthers for Recovery.
Okay, good.
So there is a pushback. There is more and more Narcan distribution to try to save some of
for
these
overdoses.
lives. Right, exactly.
Look, I have a very sort of, I've come around to a very straightforward view of different modalities of recovery, whether it's a different fellowship or a different way people do it. I was kind of very vigilant early on
Me too.
NA, it was like you had to do it our way or that was the wrong way. What I've come around to for me is, as long as someone believes in total abstinence, I don't care where they get their recovery. What I don't like are people who say they're in recovery, but they say, well, it's okay if I use this drug, but not that drug. And to me, there's no difference. Whether it's a wet drug, alcohol, or a powder drug, or an herbal drug, they're all the same. And so what's important to me is that people who are in recovery, meaning that they are totally abstinent. That's what's worked for me, and that's what I believe people need to do. And I've seen people in other fellowships believe they can use this and use that, and that just doesn't work for me.
What we call them is jails, institutions, or death over time.
Right.
So I also was come from the school of My Way or the Highway and through NA, and the our brothers in AA had generally a similar approach. I don't want to speak for them, but I think that's true. Especially though during the pandemic, I discovered that, well, first off, I knew that our fellowship or any of the AA or NA or whatever doesn't work for everybody. Not only that, it doesn't work for the majority of people. Either they have a problem with God, or they have a problem with the steps, or they have whatever problem, and it's not going to. So do we just throw them under the bus and say, tough shit, you know? But there are, for instance, I go to a meeting on Tuesdays, that's takes a Buddhist approach. And I know a lot of people from all over the country, because they do a Zoom hybrid meeting, from all over the country and all over the world that are clean over time, that have put time together through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Paths. It's very similar to the 12 steps.
Listen, I have a very good friend in recovery who's been clean for over 35 years who does not believe in God. For him, and he found a way to be an atheist and work his way through Narcotics Anonymous, stay in, work the steps in the way that he's done it, and it's worked for him. So everyone, it's a program that can be adapted to people's different interests and needs and wants, and you have to do what works for you. Again, for me, as long as you're totally abstinent.
So
actually, one other thing, the reason I say that is I have a good friend who at one of my early meetings used to say, switching drugs is like changing seats on the Titanic. You're still going down with the ship.
We'll leave that there.
Yep.
We'll leave that there. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get too deep into the show. I want to acknowledge our sponsor today. We have a sponsor. I know for me, when I got clean, hair I got clean, and then my mouth was still dirty and felt dirty. And there was stuff going on, and I went to a dentist, and fortunately today, smile, there's that smile, bright smile. If you're having a problem with your mouth and you want to make it better, go see Dr. David Cabanzin over at the Dental Boutique and right here in South Miami. And we'll put his website and his phone number. In fact, I go back Monday for a little something, but today my mouth is clean and my whole body's clean.
That's great.
So thank you, Dr. David, for your sponsorship. The other thing I want to mention in housekeeping is our logo is a starfish. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you know the story, but I'm going to tell it because maybe some people haven't heard it. And for me, it's important to talk about. Is that the man's walking along the beach and there's just starfish everywhere. And he's walking. He comes across a little girl picking up starfish, throwing it back in the water. Picking up a starfish, throwing it back in the water. He says, "Little girl, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, the tide went out. And if these starfish don't get back in the water, the sun's going to burn them up and they're going to die. So I'm putting them back in the water." The man shakes his head. He says, "Little girl," he says, "look around. There's thousands and thousands of starfish. What you're doing, it's just not going to make a difference." And she picks up another starfish and she throws it back. And she says, "It did for that one." So, that's that's my Misfit project. I can't, I'm not responsible. I can't repair the world, but that doesn't relieve the obligation for me for trying.
A person at a time.
One person at a time. So let's talk about what else you've done or do for your recovery.
Mm-hmm.
You sponsor people?
I do.
Talk to us a little bit about sponsorship.
So, sponsorship is really, for me, the lifeblood of recovery. It's about finding someone who has experience in the fellowship and has worked and has a good working knowledge of the 12 steps. Because again, as you said before, insanity is being in a 12-step fellowship.
So you said it
not
before.
Working 12 steps.
I repeated what you said. Right, exactly.
And I had a sponsor for many years who passed away, and I got a new sponsor. And interestingly, we knew each other for a really long time, but we've really only connected in the last couple of years since I moved to Costa Rica. When I first moved there, I wasn't exactly sure how my recovery was going to go. There were no English-speaking NA meetings in my town where I live. There were some AA meetings, and I said, "Am I going to go to a different fellowship?" Even though that's kind of not where I found my recovery. And then, of course, I moved just before the pandemic, and then Zoom exploded. So I was able to go to meetings on Zoom, and I meet with my sponsor and a bunch of guys he sponsors on Tuesday nights, most of the time on Zoom. And we have a group text where we keep in touch with each other. I was doing the same thing with the men that I sponsor. I've worked through step workshops with my sponsor and one of my sponsees. I did a workshop through Living Clean, one of the pieces of NA literature. I'm doing another workshop now, and I've probably done more of the work on myself in the last 2.5 years than I had done in the 10 years before that. So for me, the pandemic's been great.
So I was at a breakfast the other morning, and before
that meant time out, right?
Yeah, it does. So no, but go down a few squirrel holes. So somebody I hadn't seen since before the pandemic, and I put on weight during the pandemic because my office there's a refrigerator in the office, and he says, "Oh, the pandemic's been good to you." And I called him a name, a dickhead, whatever it was, but I didn't appreciate the. Uh, so let's talk about what happens in a workshop or what happens working the step. Talk about that magic. Talk about the good that comes out of step work.
Well, what happened for me this last pass with this kind of new sponsor that I have is that the normal way that steps have been worked historically in NA is if I'm your sponsor, I give you an assignment and you do some writing. And then when you finish it at your own leisure, you call me and say, let's get together. I want to go over what I wrote. What we ended up doing this time is we both did the work on the steps. So we would each week, we would each write on a particular step that we were working on, get together on Zoom at the end of the week or every 2 weeks and share with each other. And it gave us a chance to really get to know each other in an intimate way that we had never known each other before. We laughed, we cried, we shared, we talked about shared experiences that we've had in different directions in our lives. And it just allowed us to really get a lot closer. So it's really about learning through the steps to embrace living the spiritual principles behind the steps: honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, brotherhood, courage, all the various principles behind those steps. And that's really what recovery is about. It's about doing the best I can, moment to moment, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, living my life according to principles that are important to me. I fall short often. None of us is perfect and we make mistakes, but it's about recognizing where I fall short and then doing the work to get back to where I feel I need to be.
Why'd you move to Costa Rica?
God, that's a great question. It's hard to really answer that, but really,
I get paid big bucks for this.
I know that. I know that. So what happened was I was at a place in my life. I had raised a couple of kids after a divorce, and my daughter had moved to New York and then moved to Germany. And my son was at college and he did a semester in Vienna, and then he did a semester in New York, and then he had moved to New York. And I was by myself and I said, my kids have had all these adventures. It's my turn. I want to have an adventure. And I had done a little traveling. I had taken a trip to Costa Rica about 8 years ago. And then about 3 years ago, I was thinking about it. And an old friend of mine put me in touch with her brother, who I knew a little bit from middle school and high school. And he had been living down there for about 8 years. I went down for a month to visit, and just a whole bunch of circumstances happened where he had an apartment on his property that was available. And I made a split decision on a phone call and said, I'm coming, in March of 2019. And he held the place for me until January. I moved down in January, and then the world shut down in March. So it was good timing for me. And I just wanted to slow my life down. I wanted a little more tranquility. Although I'm a second generation native Miamian, I didn't realize until I started living at 4,400 feet up in the mountains how much I disliked the heat. And now I live without air conditioning, mid 60s at night and in the morning, beautifully cool temperature. I breathe fresh air, and it's just been a great time. I've done a lot of traveling around the country. It's a gorgeous country with just great nature. And one of my favorite facts about Costa Rica is it has 0.006% of the world's land mass and 6% of the world's biodiversity. There are over 500,000 species of animals and plants, and my goal is to see as many of them as possible. And I've been to the Caribbean coast and the Pacific coast and to the volcanoes and the waterfalls, and there's a lot more to discover.
If you weren't clean, none of this would have been possible.
Not a chance.
You wrote a book. Tell us about the book.
I did. So the genesis of the book is that my oldest daughter, Amanda, was born with severe special needs, and she really never developed past functionally being a 1-year-old, unfortunately. And I started at one point writing a book about being the parent of a child with special needs and all the difficulties that go along with that and what it's like for siblings. And then I lost the book. And then about 7 years ago, my daughter passed away at 22, and I decided to kind of restart that project. And that kind of was the impetus. She was the impetus to do it, about what it was like to be her dad and what it taught me and what I learned about life and how I learned that really it's not about money. Like the program says, not about money, property, and prestige. It's about health and family and relationships and love. And that's really what's important. So I ended up, it kind of morphed into a memoir, and I just kind of wrote my story about her, it's called Just Say Hello. And I'll tell you the quick Just Say Hello story. Amanda was born in March of 1992, and we had just moved to our first home out in Pinecrest. And in August of 92, Hurricane Andrew hit and kind of destroyed the home we were living in. That happened for a lot of people. And we were living over on the beach, and we all had gone our separate ways, and everyone was having kids kind of at the same time. And I found that some people kind of didn't want to be around us and Amanda because they thought their kids could catch something. She didn't have a disease. She was developmentally disabled. And about a year later, a friend of mine in the program called me up, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I've been thinking about you for a year, and I've been really wanting to call you, but I didn't know what to say." And I said, "Just say hello." And I've shared that hundreds of times over the years. My point being that when I have a friend who's going through something, whether it's a loss of a loved one, a sick child, a sick parent, loss of a pet, loss of a job, whatever it is, I can't fix it, right? But I can pick up the phone and I can call you and I can just say hello and say, "I'm here. I love you. What can I do to help you?" And sometimes it's just being a shoulder, just offering a kind word. So that was the title of my book, and I've done that. I've used that a whole bunch of times.
If somebody wants to buy your book, can they do that?
I think it's still on Amazon. I think I don't really market it. I wrote it for me. Sold a couple of hundred copies to friends and family. I get calls every day from publishing houses that want a whole bunch of fees to market my book, and I'm not interested in spending money. But I say, if you want to spend the money, that's fine, and give me a small percentage. But I didn't write it to make money. I wrote it for catharsis for me.
So I do want to spend another minute on the concept of how do I overcome awkwardness, overcome uncomfortability. So I was one of the people, you were here when I got here, and I knew some of your story. We weren't close friends. I to say hello, maybe to give a hug, but I wasn't in your clique or your crowd or whatever.
You weren't cool enough. I'm kidding.
My kids tell me that I tell them I was cool before cool was cool, but that's certainly another story. So, I didn't know. I stayed away because I didn't know what to say. And it wasn't just you, and it wasn't just that situation. There was a guy that I saw, but I stayed away from him because he was. They called him Burnt Mitch, and I didn't. It was uncomfortable. He was disfigured.
I know Mitch. I remember Mitch.
And as it turned out, over time, well, two things over time.
Wonderful guy.
A wonderful guy. And he had a series of operations over time that got him back to okay, And I saw a picture of him. And what had happened is, while he was drunk, he hit a tree.
Right.
The car exploded. And then I saw a picture, like a high school picture before this happened. And he was almost as good looking as you and me, if you will.
Well, at least me.
We were saying before the show that in this town, it's not about the you, it's all about the me.
Right.
And so there's another guy who was morbidly obese, and they called him House, and he was 600 pounds. And I didn't know. And there was another, the old Cantor's wife, who's now passed, showed up at Yom Kippur bald and proud. And we became good friends, and I became a good friend of Mitch. But I wanted so bad to go up to her and say, "I don't know you. My name's Miller, and you just have a good shine about you." I didn't even have to reference, the bald head. But she was going through cancer treatment. So there is a lesson that I haven't heard anywhere else other than your book.
The lesson is to lean in, not lean out. I got a call from, I told this story about Just Say Hello to my best friend from college who lives in South Carolina. And he called me about a month later and said that a friend of his from high school and her husband had lost their 25-year-old son, and he didn't know what to do. And he read my book, and he went over to see them, and he walked in and he said, "I'm here to just say hello." I started crying. I mean, I couldn't believe that. Another quick story. One of my dear friends in recovery called me after Amanda passed, and he was unable to make it to the service. This is in my book, and I did this at my reading at Books and Books when I kind of read this passage and wasn't able to keep it together. But he called me and he left me a message, and the message said, I'm so sorry, I'm unable to make it to the service, but I'm just calling to say hello because that's what you taught me to do. And I lost it in my living room. The tears are falling on the wood floor. And that's what it's about, leaning in. We can't shy away from the people we care about. If they're going, again, I can't fix what you're going through, but I can tell you that I'm there and I care. And that's really all we can do sometimes as human beings for other people that we care about.
I know that you're telling the story of the book, because I've heard it before, has absolutely, that just lean in, has absolutely changed. When I see a person who's different, no, Miller, you can't run away. Just go say hello.
Because we teach our kids to run away. I remember when Amanda was very young, I had her in a stroller, and she had some issues with her feet, and so her feet were casted. And you could tell she had some issues, and some kids would come over and want to say hello, and the parents would yank them away. I said, no, let your kids are curious. Let them be curious. They can ask anything they want, because kids are honest and they just want to understand. And so I learned, again, it was another lesson of lean in. Nothing wrong with leaning in. It's the way to kind of let someone know that you're there.
So we're gonna wrap it up. Boy, the half hour goes fast, right?
It really does.
It really does. I think we should change it to an hour. We're going to change it. Producer, we're going to change it to an hour. No, we're not. But a couple of things. First, I want to thank again our sponsor, Dr. David Cabanzin. If you could please put his number and his website. We're grateful for the work he does. And
Sure.
Anybody who gets clean, go get your teeth cleaned also and your mouth fixed up. Certainly made me feel better when I did that. Also, if you have a problem with addiction and you don't know where to turn, we fortunately today have MiamiRecoveryProject.org. They handle peer support meetings, referral services, as well as overdose training and free Narcan distribution. Save some lives, the Department of Children and Families. If you want to be guest of my show, you have to know me real well.
That's right.
Too bad. No, you can email me at miller@cnews.net.
Okay.
The other thing I want to do is
Can I give my business a very quick plug?
Oh yeah, we forgot to. Go ahead, you get a minute.
So I'm an attorney. I'm not working that much these days. I moved to Costa Rica again to slow down and not work that much. But my business is called Orshan PA. You can find me at orshanpa.com. I do primarily bankruptcy work. I represent individuals who need help in bankruptcy, or small businesses that need to either liquidate or reorganize. And I'm able to work fully from Costa Rica and do hearings on Zoom and telephone, and it's worked out pretty well.
Producer, did you put all that information there? There it is.
It's all there.
So let's stay there we got another 20 seconds or so. As I recall, you won. I'm going to pat your back. You stroke you a little. You won some awards as an attorney.
I've won some awards. I've been the one that was the most important was I was named a legal luminary in bankruptcy about 4 or 5 years ago at a dinner among a bunch of lawyers. And the thing that was most important about that for me, it was voted on by my peers. And I've been named a best lawyer in America and a super lawyer in Florida and all of those kinds of things over the years. I've received some accollades for the work that I do.
So what should happen for somebody to get hold of you? What are they? Bankruptcy they're going through? Who's your best client?
Someone who typically I represent people who have judgments entered against them because of a business failure or something like that. Someone who guaranteed a debt on an obligation or on a building or on a house that they don't own, and so they have a commercial obligation due. The kind of the run-of-the-mill people that just have a small amount of debt, I typically tend to do different kinds of clients. Not that I wouldn't speak with them and refer them out to someone else that might be more appropriate for them. And just people that have debt-related issues that need legal help.
So if you're thinking of getting hold of Paul, do it. Just lean in and do it.
Lean in. Just say hello.
Just say hello. I want to give a shout out to my son, Sergeant Josh Myers.
Thank him for his service.
He's in Germany. Works on weapon systems there. And be safe, son. I love you and thank you for your service. And Paul, thank you for a great show. I want to hug you. You've been great.
Thanks, Miller. This was great.
Appreciate it.
My
All right.
pleasure.
That's it, guys.